So recording is in progress. So welcome everybody. And I'll start with a short presentation. And I hope, oh, did I share my screen? Do you see the presentation now?
Not yet.
Can you see the presentation or do you still see me?
Just you.
To see you.
Okay, so let's see
Should
how
be
I-
a share button at the bottom.
Yeah, I thought it was.
As I've learned, the first share is always the hardest.
That. Now, do you see anything?
Just you.
Just me. Oh boy. Done this before and sharing options.
There should be a share screen button at the bottom,
Yeah, there is a share screen button.
and then it will bring up images of the items that can be shared, and then you, there you
Now
go.
we're getting somewhere. Yes.
No, okay, good. So this is a very short presentation. Let's see, this is out. Just to give a background to
Yep. Perfect.
what we're talking about. So a little about myself, how I got started and all that. I started collecting chess stamps back in 1983. I was 17 at the time, and obviously today I've been, what, 25, something like that. When I started, I only collected stamps. And I was very proud of my collection, even though nowadays I realize it was nothing exceptional. And whenever friends came over, I used to show them my collection and brag about it. And I knew they were really impressed by that, by the way they looked, and the quickness by which they fled the apartment. So I thought it's a good idea to actually exhibit my collection to the general public. And I think in the early 90s, I was already thinking about exhibiting. Now, I didn't know much about exhibiting, and I got some words of advice and information from the Thematic Association in Israel. And I learned that an exhibition is a place where you show your exhibit, and the exhibit is viewed and graded by judges. And basically, it's sort of a competition, but unlike most competition, it is not a zero-sum competition. We compete alongside one another, not against one another, and hopefully everybody does well and everybody show good collections. So how does the points, are the points allocated? Essentially, there's 50-50 distribution. 50% of the points are given to the philatelic side and 50% for the thematic side. And of course, I'm talking here about thematic exhibits, not about traditional or Western history. So on the thematic side, we have 15 points for the plan of the exhibit, the title and plan actually, and 15 points for the development, which is how the story is told throughout the exhibit. 5 points are given for innovation and 15 for thematic knowledge, how well I know my theme. On the philatelic side, there are 20 points for rarity and 10 points for condition, 5 points for the presentation, and 15 for philatelic knowledge. And when I was thinking about exhibiting, that's basically what I knew, and I had some ideas in mind. And then in the mid-90s, I met a guy called Ron Berger, and I want to mention his name because he's no longer with us. And he's really taught me a lot when I started, and I owe him great debt. And the first thing he told me when I discussed exhibiting with him is, he told me that I have a very bad subject in chess. His words were, I have never seen a good chess exhibit. And what are the problems that he listed with chess? The first is that everybody is doing the same thing. So one collection is very similar to the second. And it's not interesting to see the same thing over and over again. More importantly, he said the approach of the exhibitors is topical and not thematic. That means they don't really tell a story, they just give you lists. So he said there's a chapter, always a chapter of world champions. The first world champion, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, and so on. And says, why should I care who was the eighth world champion? I mean, if you're a chess enthusiast, maybe you care, but that's not really interesting. And then there are the Olympics, the first, the second, the third, the fourth, and it's really, really boring. So since everybody's doing the same, you don't get much points in innovation. And with the plan being very rigid and not really telling a story, you can't get much points in plan and development. And on the philatelic side, chess is a modern theme. It's the first stamp we all know is 1947. So not a lot of points for rarity. Now, I should say, when we talk about rarity among ourselves, it's a little different from what philatelists define as rare. We define rare, think of rare as something there are few copies around. So if there's, let's say, a Djibouti stamp from the 70s, and we have a die proof, we all know there's about 20 copies, we think it's rare. Well, in the philatelist's mind, it's not rare because it's not important enough. Or if you want, the demand is not high enough. If you have a die proof of a British stamp from the 1870s, let's say, this is in high demand. So this is truly rare. The other problem with chess material, there's a lot from African countries or from all sorts of islands and all sorts of virtually non-existent entities. And of course, philatelists give that a very low grade. So there's not much rarity. And if there's not much rarity, you can't show philatelic knowledge. And with all the fictitious issues, again, it's a question of philatelic knowledge. So if you can't get high scores in your plan, into your development, in the rarity and philatelic knowledge, how can you get a decent grade? So that's the problem that I was facing. And the solution, oh, I should say the worst part is, if you do what everybody else is doing, it's not really fun, it's not challenging. You're going for the same thing they have gone. And the solution was, sorry, why it's good. Oh, the solution was develop a new approach, which is personal. Ron Berger's words were, you should find something that reflects who you really are. And I remember it reflects my personality. And I remember being rather angry with him because at that point, I didn't even know I have a personality. And certainly I didn't know what it means in terms of philately. And so I should develop a personal approach that also allows the inclusion of rare material. And again, this is far more important. It should give me, the exhibitor, an enriching experience. And it took me quite a while to really finalize the idea of what I want to do. I would say about 5 to 10 years to develop the concept. So around year 2000, I had my concept developed. It took me another decade to assemble all the material that I thought was necessary. And I exhibited for the first time in 2010. That was in a local exhibition. Another 4 years passed before I was able to exhibit first time abroad. That was in Paris in 2014. A year later, I got a large vermeil medal, and that allowed me to expand my collection from 5 to 8 frames. And in 2017, I got my first gold medal, and that was in Finland in 2017. And essentially, since then, that is my level. I get anywhere between 90 to 92 points when I exhibit. And hopefully one of these days, I'll be able to get further, get to 95 points and win a large gold medal. So what is the concept? Well, I know that you've all seen it, but nevertheless, I want to emphasize a few points. So the concept that chess is the game of war, we all know that. And in fact, chess was invented to imitate war and give it some sort of positive spin. What I try to do is tell the story of chess, and at each step along the way, do the comparison with war. What I need to emphasize is that I do not tell the story of war. I tell the story of chess. So there are parts of war which have no parallel in chess, and I don't discuss them. My only intention is to discuss chess. And of course, it is personal because, well, nobody's done anything similar to that. And it truly reflects who I am because I have interest in history and in military history. And the fact that I can put that into the exhibit is really the personal approach. I think I should skip that. It's not really important. I want to talk a little about innovation. There are 5 points allocated for innovation. And invariably, I get these 5 points. Innovation is not only reflected by the concept. You are required to have a new concept to be innovative, but it's not enough by itself. Innovation is also in my case, by using material to discuss the chess games that are on the stamps, constellation, and the postal stationaries. And I'm really surprised that very few chess exhibits have done that. Sometimes I've seen chess exhibits that they say this is from this and this game, but they don't really discuss the chess as itself, by itself. Innovation is also demonstrated by innovative usage of errors. We'll see some examples of that. And by introducing material which is not trivially related to the theme. And again, I want to emphasize, I'm talking here about chess. If we look at, and I'll show that later on, if we look at the chess pages, occasionally I use material that is not trivially related to the theme, but it belongs there. As far as the material, I try to use as little as possible. I can't do totally without, but as little as possible material from questionable countries. And I do try very hard to excel in chess material. Obviously, the more rare items in my exhibit relate to the war part, to the military part, but I do try to excel in chess material. And I do that by using some sort of new material, new items, they're not new, but items I've discovered or others have discovered that are of quality. And I try to make the covers I'm using interesting. And we'll see that in a minute. Okay, so that was the short introduction. And now I'm going to go through the pages really quick. We'll do that. We'll stop on the interesting things to say. Just a question, do everybody see the exhibit pages now?
No.
Was that a no?
Still your PowerPoint, your last slide on your
Okay,
PowerPoint.
so I guess I need to change the share screen somehow. Where's
The share may be now at the top.
I'm struggling a bit. Oh, yes, new share, you're correct. Here it is.
There it is.
Oh, yes,
Okay,
we're getting there.
so we'll start with the first page. The first page is always includes the exhibit plan and few words of introduction and up to one or usually one item that is good to put there. The item I've chosen is postcard that shows the World War I with relation to chess. I think it's an obvious choice for my exhibit. In the first tries when I exhibited, I noticed the judges, you should know that judges get only the first page before the exhibition starts. They get it a couple of months before the exhibition. They study it at home, and then they come to the exhibition hall and start the judging procedure. So it's an important page in that respect. And one of the comments they made throughout the years was that they didn't really understand what my concept was from that page. And they didn't expect to see war items along the way. So I've added this table here to help them realize what I'm doing, and it really did the trick. And ever since I've introduced that table, they know what I'm doing. There are essentially 7 chapters to the exhibit. One is a prologue and 6 real chapters. 2 of the chapters, number 1 and number 6, are shorter. They are meant to be shorter. They are the introduction and the end of the exhibit. And the 4 in the middle, chapters 2 to 5, are the main issue. They are the bigger chapters. I'll start with the prologue. The prologue is really a sort of personal approach. And the question is really, what is chess to me? And of course, we know that some people view chess as a game, view it as an art form, they view it as a pastime or sport or many other things. And obviously, I view that as a battle. So I'll do it really quickly, but here's a new, what I refer to as new old item. This is Russian, sorry, it's a Russian postal stationery from 1900 with small ads on the back. Because of the ads, the postal stationery was sold to the public at a discount. And one of the ads by, I think the name is Krotovka or something like that, Krotovka, is a store that sells all sorts of games like checkers, toys, domino, lotto, and chess. So this item is not, I've published it in Chess Temp Review, obviously, but before that, I've never seen it advertised anywhere as a chess item. And this is, for me, a new discovery, and it's a way to introduce an old item, which is very respectable, into the chess exhibit. So here, of course, the page discusses on the right-hand side, in the title of the page, chess is a game, so it is sold with other games, and it is played as a leisure activity. And we have the Soviet Constitution stamp on the left-hand side with an error of missing perforation. But chess is, of course, studied much more than domino or other games. And so it's not really a regular game, so to speak. And other people view it as a sport. So I discussed chess as a sport. And here we have a full sheet of the 1962 Cuban stamp with an error, and it's a perforation error. So some of the perforations in this sheet are missing or only partial. So you can see at the bottom here, it's very clear the perforations are existent, and here they didn't go through, and you can't separate the stamps properly. And I use this sheet with the text that chess is unseparated from other sports. And this is a nice way to use the technical error and give it a thematic value. And of course, there are other games or other sports activities that can be mentioned here. And I said, to me, chess is mostly a battle, two people facing one another, fighting one another, so to speak, but they fight or they test their brain power, and they do it in a gentlemanly manner. And to me, this is a good place to use the chess item from Italy, from the Circolo Nueva, whatever it's called, the gentleman club there. And the fact is that this gentleman club has nothing really to do with chess, but still they think chess is respectable enough to symbolize their club. So I thought that was a good place to use it. I think I'm a bit struggling with the Zoom thing. I think somebody wanted to ask a question. If they do, just go ahead and ask. If not, I'll just proceed. Okay, so I'm going through. Chapter 1 is the introduction of how it all began. So how it all began is the title of the chapter. This is the title of the subchapter, and this is the title of the page. And essentially, games were invented to give a positive spin on things from daily life. And in the old days, people had to hunt to get their food. And I show that on the top of the page. And on the bottom is when they turned that into a sport or a leisurely activity. So in the old days, they used to hunt for food. And later on, they started hunting for sports. And the same is true for bird shooting, which of course today we prefer clay pigeon shooting. Another example is the world of economics. We have the world of real estate, banks and loans, and purchasing real estate. I'm sorry, I'm missing the word in English. Just real estate, I guess. And this was turned by the Parker Games Company into a game we all know, Monopoly. And of course, war was part of everyday life, still is, unfortunately. So even in the old times, we have ancient weapons that were existent, and we have archaeology findings of a full army with the terracotta soldiers. And every anthology of all times has reference to war, includes wars. It's true in the Bible, in the Greek mythology, in the Buddhist mythology, and there are gods assigned to war. So it was really a part of human culture. So the next step is that people took this concept of war and made a game out of it. And I'll skip just a little, and I'll talk about chess, how chess was invented. Of course, we don't really know exactly when and where. Sorry, I'm admitting someone else. We don't know exactly when and where chess was invented. And there are some legends around it. And we all know the legend of the grain, 1, 2, 4, and so on. And here I demonstrated it with a Thai stamp that has a single grain of rice on it. It's really pasted to the stamp. So it's really a very nice item in that respect. We have the constellation that shows 1, 2, and 4. And obviously, whoever made that constellation had in mind the story about the grains. And of course, the number is virtually infinity. We have a very nice constellation from Paris from the 1774, which is called Paris the Infinity and has the infinity mark. And then I discuss, and of course, all the crops of all the fields in the world are not sufficient, even today, to yield the number of grains requested by the inventor of the game. And then, of course, we have the historical origins, which we believe that chess was invented in India and then moved into Persia. And the name Schach in German and Skak in Sweden are indicative of the Persian origin. And the same is true for chess in English. And I just want to draw your attention to this cover. Again, I've written about it in Chess Stamp Review. But this item is interesting. Just a chess meter is very common. It's a good item, but it's not interesting enough. When you have a cover which was sent by the mail and was taxed, and the tax was collected because the mailing was insufficient, that makes an interesting cover. That's why I show the cover as a full cover and not just show the part of the meter. And I guess I'll skip a little. And with that, I end the first frame. And we move to frame number 2. Okay. And frame number 2 starts actually chapter number 2. And chapter number 2 is called The Sides Line Up. And this chapter includes everything that happens before we start playing. And the first thing we need before we start playing is we need pieces. And each piece in chess is derived from the world of war. So in the old times, and still true today, we have the foot soldiers. They can carry a spear or a rifle, and they walk on foot. And of course, that is the pawn that we know in chess. Now, to make the link between the war and chess, I use here a stamp, and unfortunately it's from Central Africa, but I don't have anything better, or at least I can't think of anything better, where we have an ancient chess piece which was designed like a warrior with a spear. And because the pawn in chess is like the foot soldier in war, it's the most expandable piece, it's the weakest piece, and that is why, and this I show here, it has the lowest mobility. It can only go forward only one step at a time. What I do here is I use a first day cover from Hungary to show that the pawn is the weakest of the pieces in chess. And I do that by using a first day cover with 4 chess stamps. On each stamp, there's one piece. And the one with the pawn has the lowest face value. And has lowest face value because pawn is the lowest or the weakest chess piece. It's not a very good item in philately speaking. So if anyone has a good idea of how to show that pawn is the weakest piece in chess, I'll be happy to hear that. And then we go to the knight. The knight is obviously the warrior mounted on a horse. And again, I try to put items of quality here. So I have the 1929 British UPU stamp, which is a beautiful stamp showing St. George on fighting the dragon on a horse. But the stamp itself is easy to find. A specimen is far more difficult and far better appreciated. And well, we know this cancellation. It's one of the nicer items to show a chess knight. The maximum card is a good way of showing that the chess knight can jump over other pieces, which is by itself a manifestation of the fact that the piece is derived from a horse, like a horse can jump over obstacles. The bishop is an elephant, and I'll take a few seconds or half a minute to discuss this item in case some people don't know what a V-mail is. V-mails were made during the Second World War. The British had a similar thing called airgraph. The idea is that there are many soldiers in the front and they want to write home. And there are enormous amount of letters to ship. And there's not enough airplanes to carry all these letters. They're heavy and they consume a lot of space. So the idea was to produce a form which the soldier can write on that form, and then the form is they take a picture of the form and reduce it into a microfilm. So a single microfilm can carry thousands of letters, and that is very easy to ship in a plane. It doesn't take much space. It doesn't carry much weight. And when this microfilm reaches, let's say, from Southeast Asia, when it reaches the United States, the microfilm is developed and the forms are printed and they're sent to the family. Another feature of these V-mails is because some poor censor has to read all the letters, they always have these drawings in them, which are used to occupy a lot of space. So the idea is that the soldier in the front line has minimal writing space, and he can just say, "Hi, I'm doing fine, love you, miss you," and something like that. That's a lot easier for the sensor. So the V-mail here shows a usage of elephant in the battlefield or by the army. And this is, of course, shown by other pieces from Southeast Asia where this was really done. And again, I show an elephant as a chess piece. And this is the bishop. We have the bishop move. And obviously, I really love that meter by the moving company bishop's move. And here is an original artwork of the stamp by Mali, which shows a chess piece designed as an elephant. And let's all try and be quick. So we have the chariot, which is the rook, the story of how the chariot became the rook, with the mispronunciation of the word for chariot in Italian, Tarocca. Tarocca is a tower. Over here, we have two items that I wish to discuss briefly. One is the watermark on a Spanish stamp from the 1890s. The watermark has the shape of what we looks like a rook in the Staunton design. And for me, it's a good opportunity to use something unusual, not just a stamp that shows a piece. And on the right-hand side, we have a letter sent in Italy in 1859. It's before Italy was Italy, but never mind. And you see that it has a constellation here. The constellation is a town constellation because it was sent by either the mayor or the court of that town or somebody official. And because it was sent officially, it was giving postal privileges. They didn't have to pay for this cover because it had that postmark which said it's an official business, do not charge postage. And then we have the king, and old times the king, of course, led the army in battle. In modern times, we don't do that anymore. We really protect our kings. And I allowed myself here to move aside a bit and mention the Chinese version of chess, where the king is really confined to his castle because we need to protect the king. And the king in chess is marked normally with a cross, at least in Western civilization. And the king in real life is usually recognized by the crown. And here we have a very nice item, a letter sent in England in 1701. Back then, there was a very complicated system of deciding how much postage should be paid. And in this case, the postman thought the right postage was 3 probably pennies. And that was the postage that the recipient had to pay for receiving that letter. However, on the way to London, sent from London, on the way, a postage inspector checked whether the franking is correct, and he decided that actually the weight of the letter is too heavy, it's more than the regular rate, and he crossed out the number 3 He wrote 6 because it's more expensive. He signed, and he put this crown constellation, which is really the inspector constellation. That gives him the constellation, gives him the authority to charge more. So this is a very interesting item philatelically that shows the crown. And Charles, you probably know Bill Barrell. Is one of the dealers I work with, and I got that one from him. I'll skip the queen, just not to waste too much time, and we move to the next subchapter. Now we've seen all the chess pieces, but we need to make an army out of them. And to make an army in chess, we need to take 8 pawns. So I didn't want to put 8 stamps, each of which shows pawn. I thought that would be really uninteresting. So I put 1 pawn and a cover with a constellation of 8, which is very large and very clear. Sorry. And we need 2 knights. So I use an imperforated pair, 2 bishops. I have a stamp that shows an ancient bishop and modern one, so 2 bishops, a king and a queen, and a pair of rooks. Again, we have this town constellation, which means it's an official business, and the letter is not charged by the post. I want to emphasize something here. When I talked about the allocation of points, I mentioned that one of the criteria is condition. Here you can see what condition means. The cancellation is exceptionally of high quality. It's very clear, and this is the type of quality that is required when exhibiting. Again, I'll skip that bit. That was the size of the army, and I'm talking about the colors. Of course, in chess, we have a black army and a white army, but it can be of any color, usually light and dark. And here I use the Swiss stamp with the double error of missing blue color and shifted perforation. And here, and I say that for each piece with a dark color, there's also a corresponding piece with a light color. And of course, in the army, the 2 armies, again, each has its own colors. In the old times, the colors were very important for, I guess, morale or for identification. And the classic example I could think of was the American Civil War, the blue coats and the gray coats. Of course, in modern times, armies use uniforms that blend with the surroundings. So in case of wars that in snow zones, they use white jackets and they use hockey uniforms. The first example was in the Boer War. When you have army, let me just accept Ricardo Andres. Welcome, Ricardo. See you. So we reached subchapter 2.3. We have armies. Each army needs a commander. In chess, the commander is, of course, the player. He determines what's going on. And the player can be grown-ups. They can be of some notoriety, or they can be children, or even the computer. And while normally we play one-on-one in chess, there can be also a simultaneous game when a master plays against many amateurs at the same time. And as an Israeli, for me, it was obvious that the military example for playing one against many has to do with us, with Israel, and have taken the example of the 1948 war, in which Israel fought against 5 different nations. And I show here the fighting against Syria, against Iraq, Jordan, Egypt, and against the Palestinians. Okay. We've reached the end of this frame, but not the end of the chapter. So moving to frame number 3. Okay. And so we've discussed the players, and they have to learn how to play. And in chess, they can do that by going to a chess club and learn from players there. Or they can learn from books or from private teacher, and so on. And in the army, they would go probably for a military school and learn their business there. And when they excel, of course, they're being promoted, their skills are evaluated, and we have a rating list to say who's the better player. We have titles like Grandmaster, and it is somewhat unclear who coined the term Grandmaster. Some of the sources claim it's not 100% sure it's true, but for me it worked fine that the Russian Tsar, Nikolai II, was the guy who first termed the title of Grandmaster. And this is why I can use his stamp and a proof of the central image of the stamp. And of course, in wars, you have also, in the army, you have ranks and titles, and you have distinction. You get medals for distinction. The next thing you need if you want to play is the chessboard. And the chessboard really is the frame, sets the frame of what's inside the game and what's outside it. And we all know that pieces that are outside the game, or outside the board, sorry, do not take part in the game anymore. And to show the difference of that from the army, I used the example of Hannibal in the Second Punic War. And here I use an air graph. As I said, air graph is the British equivalent of V-mail, again from the Second World War. And somebody, I don't know why, bothered to make this design. He must have thought about me, because I cannot think of any other explanation. We have here a map of Europe with Italy and Tunisia marked in black. Well, for me, that is excellent, because in the Second Punic War, the Romans thought that the only way that Hannibal can attack them is come directly from Tunis to Italy using ships. But in fact, Hannibal, as we all know, used elephants and took the long way and rode through the Alps and surprised them. And essentially, he was thinking outside the box or outside the board. He was really maneuvering outside what the Italians or the Romans thought was the board. So to show that, I have a cancellation here from a military ship called Hannibal, and I have here a cancellation that shows his usage of elephants. In chess, the board is flat, it is symmetric, it is really very fair. No side has an advantage. Of course, in the army, quite often this is not the case. Competent army commanders try and get some advantage by using topography. So they set castles or posts on top of hills, and fighting uphill is, of course, very difficult. And here I discussed the size or orientation of the board. We have, of course, the checkered pattern, and here this is 7x6, so it's not a chessboard, just a checkered pattern. And here we have a chessboard with the error of color. And I know that when I print it, it's not always showing well, but I think in the scan here it does. So you can see here that the yellow and green colors are perfectly aligned, whereas here we have the yellow color shifted up, and we have actually three colors: white, yellow, and green. And this is, of course, a printing error. And this is something that was mentioned in Chester review. Okay, sorry, I'll just say that I'm moving to a different sub-chapter, and that is the supporting infrastructure. Because now we have pieces, we have a board, we have players, we're essentially ready to go, but we still need some supporting infrastructure. And we need manufacturers of pieces, just pieces of chess equipment. And to show that, I use the Mallory with the Hallett postal advertiser, where they sell just pieces made of ebony and things like that. I have 2 copies of that Mallory. One is a postally used copy, which is seen here. It is not in a good condition. So when opportunity arose, I also bought the only known mint copy, and I use both of them on the same page. And manufacturers, I mentioned the village of Worstendorf in Germany, and I have the Lebanese stamp when the board is inlaid. And of course, there are manufacturers of war equipment. And here we have a very nice item of a perfin. For those of you who are not familiar, in the old days, it sort of ended 60, 70 years ago, companies used to have large quantities of stamps to be used for their mail. But apparently, employees used to steal those stamps and use it for personal correspondence. So what the company used to do is to punch holes in the stamp usually with the initials of the company. In this case, the initials are FN. This is a Belgian company that produces, among other things, weapons. Got what the initials stand for, but they also produce cars, but essentially Fabrice National, the arms or something like that. That's the initials. So these stamps can only be used by the company and only in the post office branch, which is close to their headquarters. And these stamps with the perforated initials called perfins. It's short for perforated initials. And here I have something which is far more rare than a perfin stamp. It's a perfin postal stationery. It's a very nice item. Incidentally, underneath the stamp is a possibility of using that only on a weekday and not on Sunday. So this stationery could not have been mailed on Sunday. And that is out of respect for the religious desire of some people. And if you wanted to send it on Sunday, nevertheless, you had to cross out that printing and you could mail it then on Sunday also. After production, there's also distribution. There are places that sell chess equipment. There are stores that do that. This is, again, a postal stationery used in Berlin in 1988, in 1889. Back then, until 1900 in Germany, there were private companies that could deliver mail only inside the city. It did not have to be through the government service. So this is a postal stationery that was valid inside Berlin. The name Berlin is therefore printed. You couldn't send it to, let's say, to a different, I don't know, Frankfurt or anything like that. And to make the price cheap, they also added all sorts of advertisements on the periphery of the postal stationery, and that is how they could keep the price low. And here we have ad of a company called Max Lange. I don't know if it has to do anything with a chess player or not. And he sold domino and Schachspiel. So this is a place where you could buy chess sets and chess pieces. And also there are places where you can buy military equipment. Of course, you don't find advertisements of stores that sell tanks, but you can find rifles and things like that. Hopefully for hunting animals and not people. A small confession, this part maybe it should be located elsewhere in the exhibition because it has to do with tournaments rather than just playing, say, among friends. If you want to conduct a tournament, there's a financial side to it. It costs money to conduct a tournament. And therefore, we need sponsors. And in the old days, it was basically up to royalty. The first international chess tournament was hosted by King Philip II of Spain. And he hosted it in his own palace in Escorial. So what I have here is a cancellation of Cana Escorial from the early 1900s. And I have a letter sent by King Philip II. And over here, I photocopied the part where he signs the letter. And obviously, by signing the letter, you can be sure that the postal services will accept the letter and forward it to whoever the recipient is, and they will not argue with King Philip, and they will not ask him to pay for postage. And later on, we have the example of the Hastings tournament of 1895, where the guy was then the Duke of York. Later, he was King George V. And he was the formal sponsor of that tournament. In more modern times, sponsorship for chess events comes from either the government, and especially in countries that think it's important to support chess for various reasons. It can be Cuba or the Soviet Union in this example. And essentially they want the image and the respectability that chess provides, and they want success in the international arena to glorify their names. And in the Western world, it'll be mostly companies such as IBM that feels that it's good for their image to support and sponsor a chess tournament. Another means of supporting financially chess is when you have a major chess event like an Olympic, then it's by producing stamps and applying a specific tax on mail. And Yugoslavia has done that in 1990. And we have here some examples of that with a regular letter sent registered where the tax stamp was applied. And this letter was sent, the payment was done in cash to the post clerk, so there's no stamp, but yet the tax they had to place the stamp to prove that the tax was indeed paid. Cancellation here says that the postage itself was paid in cash to the postal clerk. And the equivalent here is by financing a war through stamps. And this was done in World War I in essentially the entire British Empire by overprinting stamp with the word war tax. And the stamps you had to pay extra for these stamps. And this supplied the needed funds for the war. So again, I've reached the end of the frame. I'm moving to frame 4. And we'll move to the second page here because this is where I start the third chapter. And now we have all the equipment we need. We can start playing. And when we start playing, we set the board with the pieces. We sit by the board, facing one another. We shake hands. Again, I'm using this Italian constellation of a city or a town that the symbol of the town contains shaking hands. And this is not very clear on the constellation, but here I've printed the town symbol and you can see that they shake hands. And white makes the first move. The first move in this case is e2, e4. And I have the very nice, very rare printing error with the blue color shifted, which I got in one of the auctions that Nico conducted. So here's a good opportunity to thank Nico for doing that. And then black replies and the game goes on. Of course, war doesn't start so in such a civil way. And the obvious example is the Pearl Harbor surprise attack by the Japanese. And I do that in this page and move forward. And then the game continues by a sequence of moves. Again, I'll be very quick. And we register the moves on a score sheet. We use typically the algebraic notation. And here's a good place to use this item, which I really, really like. This letter sent. I'm struggling a bit with the Zoom, but never mind. This letter sent in 1942 from Germany to Hungary. Of course, back then, Hungary was an ally of the Germans. So mail could have gone through easily from Germany to Hungary. And the letter was returned because it violated the rules of censorship. And the reason was it contained a chess problem. I'm not entirely certain. I think it was a game played by mail, chess game played by mail. and contain chess moves. And of course, the sensor cannot be sure what those letters and digits really symbolize. The equivalent of controlling or recording your moves is by monitoring your troops on the battlefield. And I have a very nice study or mini study of a Serbian stamp from 1915. The stamps were prepared based on a photo that shows King Petar at the battlefield. The king visited his troops, and the photo was published in the Serbian newspapers and made a very big impression on the Serbian public. So they decided to make a stamp out of it. And we can see here all the stages of preparing the stamp and color trials and perforation trials and so on. And unfortunately, by the time the stamps were finalized and arrived in Serbia and were distributed to the post offices, the Serbians have already lost the war, and they were conquered by the Central Powers, so they were never used as postage stamps. Next subchapters discusses the casualties of war, and in chess, of course, the casualties are really minor. There are pieces that were lost, they're missent to battle, they were eaten by the enemy, and they're taken off the board. The worst that can happen to a chess player is you can get a headache, right? And for me, the player sitting like that, it looks like he's in trouble, he's having a bad day at the chessboard. Not only a headache, it could be even a splitting headache. And yes, I should say that an English-speaking friend gave me the idea, and thank you, Lawrence. And well, if you have a headache, take a pill, you'll be fine. You'll be fine for the next game. In war, the casualties, well, it's not so nice. The casualties can be prisoners of war. I have here a letter of a prisoner of war from 1706. It is a Scottish man from, I think, Edinburgh, who was captured in the War of the Spanish Succession, and is in Brest, the castle of Brest, and is writing a letter to his family. Now, in 1706, if you were a prisoner of war, you were better off dead than alive, because, you know, back then, the military units were led by the nobility, and the soldiers of that unit were usually the peasants and slaves of that nobleman. And if you were taken as a prisoner, you would become the servant of the servants. You were at the bottom of the pile, and you were usually better off dead than alive. This guy is very lucky because he's from high class financially. We know that because he knows how to write. Most people obviously were illiterate back then. And the reason he's allowed to write is because he can plead to his family to pay ransom. So he'll be back home. So his family has money. I don't know if they bailed him out or not, but obviously he had some sort of expectation that they would pay for him to be released. Other victims of war are soldiers wounded and then treated in military hospital. Here we have a letter sent without postage because it's on His Majesty's service, posted by a wounded soldier. and it's from a military hospital. And even less fortunate are those that are killed in action. We have here a letter from World War I sent to the frontier, to the western frontier in France. And somebody has written on it, killed in action, returned to sender. It's possible that the family learned that their loved one was killed by getting this letter back. And then soldiers are quite often, actually it started, I think it started in World War I, they were built in military cemeteries. So we have stationery here that shows military cemetery. And I'll skip the timetable, time issues, and I'll move to frame frame 5, and discuss the end of war. How does chess game end? Well, since the aim of the game is to checkmate the king, first you have to check the king. So I show here the situation of a check and the announcement Shah, and then the king can run away. And here's an example of an item which is not really chess related, but nevertheless it's not even an amazing thematic knowledge. We all know that, but with thematic knowledge, you can incorporate that. We all know that in the sign language of chess, a situation of check is symbolized by a plus sign. So here I took a letter with a cross or a plus sign. This was a sign for also used by the post for registered mail. So this letter was sent by registered mail and was marked with, again, with a plus or a cross. Unfortunately for that letter was sent from Kobe, Japan to Cape Town, South Africa in 1939. And of course, back then, airplanes couldn't have made the trip on a single leg. They had many stopovers. One of them was on a landing on sea, or that was, sorry, I forgot, it was in Mozambique. And there was something wrong with the landing, and the airplane sunk. The bag of mail was retrieved, but you can see that the letter has seen better days, so to speak. So this is a crash cover, and these are of very good philatelic value. Now, should stay in this page first. I was looking for a historical example of a king that was sort of under attack in the battlefield and had to escape. And it took me a long time to find a wonderful story. Charles, you're from the UK, so you obviously know this story. But I can tell that in Israel, almost everybody I know were unfamiliar with the story. And it's from the Battle of Worcester, from the British Civil War, English Civil War. And during that war, King Charles II was actually present at the battlefield at, Worcester. And the army of Cromwell was defeating the royal army, and the king had to escape the battlefield. And in fact, since the soldiers were chasing him, he climbed on an oak tree and hid there, I think for a couple of days or so, until they just gave up on finding him. And then he came down from the tree and managed to find his way to the continent. And it took I don't know, I think about 15 or 16 years till the monarchy was restored to England and he came back to serve as King Charles II. Incidentally, the tree itself, on which he climbed, which is called the Royal Oak, is no longer in existence because so many people took souvenirs out of that tree. However, there's a tree that I don't know the English word for it, that developed out of that tree, which is called the son of the Royal Oak, which is still in existence and apparently is a tourist attraction to this day. Now, I want to tell that story. It's a wonderful historical story. How do I tell it? Well, I could find constellation that shows the Battle of Worcester. Okay, and there's a stamp that shows King Charles II, but it's a very plain stamp. It has no philatelic quality. So I managed to find in an auction a letter sent by King Charles, signed by him, Charles R., and it's 1680-81, and it's written in French. Now I'll magnify that. Look how beautiful this handwriting is. I don't think it's by the king himself. I don't think he wrote that. I think it's somebody who wrote for him. I think he just added this line here, which is in different handwriting in the signature. So just beautiful penmanship and lovely letter. I don't speak French. I had a friend translated me the text. And I want to be very courteous and say that my friend was not really impressed by the, shall we say, intelligence of the king as it is reflected by the content. Because this is a letter he sent to his cousin. Incidentally, I was able to identify which cousin it is. And apparently the cousin was ill with something. And the letter keeps saying, I'm so glad to hear that you recover from your illness because I really love you. And you're the most beloved person in my life. So it makes me very happy that you recover. And I'm so happy that you make full recovery, and it repeats itself several times. Now, to complete the story, I also had to refer to the hiding on the oak tree. So I found a British stamp showing an oak tree. It had to be an English stamp. I couldn't use a stamp from a different country. There's no question about that. And then I found the same stamp with the queen's head missing. It's a printing error. You don't have the head of the queen here. Now, it's a queen, it's not a king, but I played a little with the English language. And I could write that the king climbed the tree so no one could see the monarch. And that's just working around the difference between king and a queen. And of course, a checkmate. So I have a cancellation showing a checkmate. And I'm very fond of Macbeth, so I had to use this stamp and the quotation and the topping down of the king and the enunciation mat. And seemed to be very rude to the kings of England. The example for a king being killed in the battlefield is King Harold being killed in the Battle of Hastings in 1066. And of course, a game can end by a resignation. So I have an example here for resignation in chess and resignation in the battlefield. Now we pay tribute to the Americans. This is, of course, from the pictorial issue of 1869. This is the first American stamps that had really nice design. They're first American commemoratives. The 30-cent value was supposed to show the British surrender in Saratoga. In the last minute, they changed the design, so these stamps were never issued. So this is an essay. And we have here printing in blue and printing in brown. The stamps were supposed to be in 2 colors, so they have to test several colors. And this is a plate proof, or plate essay, actually. And this goes to show that the preparatory stages of the stamps were really advanced. Not only they prepared a die, but they prepared a full plate for printing full sheets of these stamps. But again, at the end, it was abandoned and a different design was used. And of course, a game can end in a draw. So I give here some examples. There's obviously pot, an agreement by the competitors, or not sufficient materials, and so on. And the point is split between the 2 competitors, so it's half and half. And here an example of a bisect, when the stamp was cut in half, like the point in chess. And the historical example is obviously the Korean War, which ended in virtually the same position in which it started on the 38th parallel. And let me skip this subchapter because it's less important. Okay, so now we have all the rules. We know the rules, we can play. But how can we win? In order to win, it's not enough to know the moves. I should know because I essentially know the moves, and this is why I usually lose, because I don't know enough about how to win. The first subchapter is about the defensive measures you need to take. And when we start, of course, the king is in the center of the board, and within a few moves, it is exposed. And if it is left in the center, it is susceptible to mating attacks, as in the famous game of Steinitz here. So caution needs to be, a player has to use some caution when he plays. And one of the things that we do, even I know that, is to castle. And this word is castling in German. And I couldn't find a good example. There are obviously stamps that show a castling example, but I want to show that you can build an array of defense around the king. And I couldn't find a good example, so I just manufactured one. So I draw here at the bottom right-hand side of the board, and I place the stamps on the board to show where the king stands, the rooks, the pawns, and so on. And this is a really tight defensive array. And the idea with castling is that the king is in the side of the board, so from 2 directions is protected by the sides of the board. It cannot be attacked from here or from here. So it's easier to protect the king this way. So the king is really located in a very good position for him, in a safe corner. And I have here a cancellation from a place in Granada called Snug Corner. So again, I thought, when I saw that, I thought, okay, I can be a little imaginative and find a way to introduce it into a chess collection. And of course, protecting the king by castles is something that is done everyday life. So here we have a cancellation from a place called Castello, which is the town of the castle. And we have the Windsor Castle and a proof, the Canadian stamp that shows Windsor Castle. And you can see that it is located near a body of water. And in fact, the water provides some protection to the castle in a somewhat similar way to the edge of the board that we've seen in chess. So now let's switch sides. If you're the attacking side, how do you attack a king that has castle and built a defensive array around it? Well, one of the ways you do is you enforce a siege on that king. And I have here an example where the king, the cancellation is not of very good quality, but the black king here is obviously castled, but there are white pieces that still attack him nevertheless. So in this case, the fortress has really become, it's like a prison in which he's located. And I have an example from a game by Nimzowitz, where he's really putting a blockade on, and you see that the king is located in the corner, but all the black pieces attack that corner, and Nimzowitz has described it as one of his best blockading games. And of course, one of the advantages we have in chess with respect to war is the defensive side must make a move. He cannot just wait. And he has to make a move even if he can't make a good move. And in the Romanian postal stationery, and which I'm very proud of having found one that has gone through the mail. To me, it's much better than a mint one. In this stationery, in principle, white couldn't make much progress if black could just stand still, because black is protected well enough. But because black has to move, at some point, he will have to move his rook and lose protection here. So, sorry. I'll just do that. And here's the example of siege in a war. This is a very strong page from a philatelic point of view. It discusses the 1870 war between Prussia and France, in which the Prussians have set siege on several French cities. And just I'll discuss that briefly, maybe no soon. Here we have the siege of Paris, and mail into Paris came through pigeon mail, and we have here one example of that. Mail going out of Paris was carried in hot air balloons, and that mail is called ballon monté. And here's an example of a letter sent by ballon monté, and you can see that the paper is really very thin because the hot air balloon had to carry a lot of postage. So they really asked for letters to be used with a very thin paper. So this is siege in war. Let's move to frame 6 and continue with methods of attack. Of course, when brute force doesn't work and siege doesn't work, we really need to be more imaginative, and we have a reconciliation from a place called combination. And combination is what we do to find the key to open the castle. And in a combination, we give some pieces, or some, in this case, knight or a rook in this case, to get some sort of compensation. This is a postal stationery which was intended to send registered. You see the cross or the plus sign, which is for registered mail. But because of some error, the indicia was also printed on the back side, so on the front. And here's an example of a combination in which Lasker sacrifices his rook for a pawn in order to break the defensive line of his opponent. And here's an example of sacrifice in real life, the French Revolution, where the masses attacked the Bastille. And of course, there were sacrifices. Many people were killed there, but they managed to break the defensive line and they were triumphant. Another combination, which obviously one has to use, is the smothered mate. And we all know this block by Romania. And the idea here is that you mate the black king because it doesn't have air, so to speak. And unfortunately, I have only 2 items that I can show to exhibit smothered mate. I didn't have anything to put in the bottom part of this page. So what I did is to use a letter from 1539. It was sent in Italy. And this was sent using a courier. And you see here the word cito, 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 cito. This means express, means that basically the courier, when he got to the point where he was really tired, he got to a place where he was substituted, a new courier took over and was writing further on. And on top of the letter, you see hanging also at the gallows. I hope I said it right. And this is really a warning that anyone who interferes with a courier and disturbs the process of mail will be hanged. And hanging until the 19th century, when they made this very humane invention of where you break your neck. Before that, if you were hanged, you were really being smothered. You were suffocating. It was a very slow and painful death. So the threat here was really to smother whoever interfered with the mailing process. So it's really relevant to smothered mates. The equivalent is the story of the Trojan War. And if anyone can find me this postal stationery from Romania 1965 used, I'm in the market for finding one which is used. I'll be very happy to substitute the mint copy I have. Another thing which is a way to win in chess is not by directly attacking the king, but by getting other strategic advantages, like controlling the center. Here we have what is known as a typographic cancellation, where the newspaper was sent by mail, and there are huge quantities of the newspaper. So the newspaper reached agreement with the post that they got stamps before the newspaper was printed. They pasted the stamps so that the headline of the newspaper would cancel the stamp. As you can see, the word center is on top of the stamp. The stamp was applied first and then the title was printed. So this type of items are admissible in stamp exhibitions. So the theme here is controlling the center, and a piece, specifically a knight, which is located at the corner of the stamp, is of little use, really. And here I would like to thank John, because in one of the chess books I have is by John, and John gave it to me, and I'm very obliged because there was a chapter here about a knight in the corner, and that made me think that this Western Union telegram could be used to discuss the location of pieces away from the center. In contrast, this cancellation shows a chessboard with the letter C applied to the squares that are at the center of the board. So again, something I can use here. Military equivalent of controlling the center is the Battle of Midway in World War II. Of course, Midway was an American base, so I use here cancellation from Midway Islands, Marine Corps on March 42. That is some 3 months before the Battle of Midway. For the battle, the Americans set a special task force, and this is a letter sent from that task force. And the commander was Admiral Nimitz, who set the battle plan. And following that battle plan, the Americans won against the Japanese. So the title here is Japs Repulsed at Midway. And that really was extremely significant for the battle in the Pacific, because the winning the Battle of Midway, and obviously Midway is called that because it's middle of the way between the US and Japan. So it's the center of the board. And once the American won the battle there, from that point on, the war was conducted towards Japan, in Japanese territory, so to speak. So it was of great importance to the war. Another thing that is important in chess is the ability to crown a pawn. So I have here a cancellation that shows a pawn in the last rank and how it becomes a queen. And for me, it was very important that both squares are white and are at the corner of the board. So it's the same square, essentially. The pawn becomes a queen. And I'm not going into many details. I'll just say that, again, I'm very thankful to John, because I never knew that if you have queen already on the board and you're missing an extra queen, you flip a rook on the over. Obviously, you can only do that with rooks, and that is the extra queen. So I can use the well-known San Marino inverted red rooks error to give it a taste of or to use the error, give it some significance in chess terms as a queen. And of course, I have the block of 4 of that error, the only block known as far as I know. And this gives a dimension of quality, of philatelic quality. I should say that normally in exhibiting, we don't use blocks of 4 because all 4 stamps show the same image. So there's no reason to use the same stamp over and over. And the saying is that using the same stamp 4 times is like stammering when you tell a story. You don't want to do that. But in this case, because of the rarity factor, it is justified to show a block of 4. And, you know, skip that a little and, you know, talk about diversion a little. So chess diversion is when you somehow convince your opponent to move his pieces to an insignificant part of the board, and I demonstrated with the well-known Botvinnik Capablanca game. Of course, we all know that. And then I show that in a war with the Second World War, Operation Sickle Cut of the Germans. They attacked through Belgium and the Netherlands. The Allies assumed this is where things happen, and they diverted all their forces to that region, because these are the forces that were later caught in Dunkirk. But the major German effort was really through the Ardennes forests, and this is what I show at the bottom part of the page. On to frame 7. The ultimate case of diversion is when the king is lured from safety to the, so to speak, valley of death. I have 2 examples here, one by Lasker against Pillsbury and one with the Najdorf in the immortal Polish game. Is it Licksberg, the guy who lost? Anyone? Licksberg. And the equivalent, the historic equivalent, is the story of Napoleon attacking Russia, making some progress until he gets to Moscow. This is a letter from the French army in Moscow. And of course, eventually they have to retreat. And Napoleon started the invasion to Russia with 500,000 soldiers in his troops and came back 10,000. This is just, this ratio is absolutely breathtaking. Okay, so that was the chapter about tactics and strategy, which I have to admit is my favorite in the entire exhibit. And now that we know how to win, we want to implement that and win at tournaments and matches. So chapter 5 is the theaters of chess and war. And I discuss different levels of competition, starting with local and national. And of course, there's the equivalent of a national competition, trying to decide who's the best chess player in the nation, is the equivalent in war, in terms of war, is a civil war. And I have the American Civil War here. Obviously, for us, the star of the page is the Civil War patriotic cover. I've exhibited the Civil War patriotic cover for years and years, and every time the judges made a comment that I should find a postally used cover. I had a mint cover. And every time I would tell the judges, you know, there are very, very, very few postally used Civil War covers. And every time the judges would tell me, that's not our problem, that's your problem. And luckily, I think it was last year when I managed to find, obviously you all know that because it was in the Cossu auction, this lovely, lovely postally used cover. It's also in a great condition, and I'm very happy to have that item. I should say that this is probably the page I like most in my exhibit, because every single item here is of great philatelic quality. We have here the pictorial issue with Lincoln. I have plate proof of the stamp. I have the proof of the central image only, and the reissue of 1879. There are only 1,300 printed. The stamp of General Scott, which is obviously here because Scott appears on the patriotic cover. So the stamp is also a good stamp. Ulysses Grant has to appear because it was the most important military general of the North in the war. So I have a plate proof on the stamped paper. For the south side, the Confederate States of America, I have a proof of the stamp of Jefferson Davis. Again, Jefferson Davis has to be shown here because he's on the Civil War patriotic cover. And I have a letter showing Robert E. Lee autograph. Sorry. Again, there is a stamp showing Robert E. Lee, but it's a very common stamp. It's nothing special. The letter I show here was sent by Lee during the war to a general, another general of the Confederacy, Lieutenant General R.J.B. Stewart. It was sent by a courier. It is confidential and has Lee's autograph here, R.E. Lee, General. Letters sent by Lee from the battlefield are generally called field letters. There are several of them in the Smithsonian. They're in the Congressional Library. There are only about 20 to 25 in private hands. And of course, one is in my private hands. And it's one of those cases when I got that letter, I was literally shivering with excitement. It's really feeling that you hold a piece of history in your hands. Okay, and we have, so that is the national level, then we have regional level of competition and regional wars, and we have world competitions. And of course, here it's an opportunity to discuss the world tourneur in Groningen in 1946. And we have a world war. And here I should explain perhaps a little bit about this page. I wanted to show World War I as a world war. Now, how do you do that? Well, the idea was to show as many fronts as possible, to show the war was fought on different geographies and with different, many nations competing or being involved. So I have here the Western Front in France, the battles of Verdun, and we have the Eastern Front by a letter of a Hungarian prisoner of war in Russia. So this covers Europe, East and West. And this is Africa, where we have battles going on there as well with the Indian expeditionary force there. So I also have Africa and also Asia in a sense because it's an Indian force. And also I have to pay respect to my locality. So this is a letter from Palestine during World War I. It's the Austrian army in Palestine, and it's a letter sent from the Feldpost in Jerusalem, registered one of two knowns with this registration label. It's very rare. And just to complete, I also have the Australians here with a perforation stamp of the Anzac forces. I really want to add the Americans here, but simply not enough space on the page. This is another page I'm very proud of. I should say that after this is the second subchapter, the first was the different types of tournaments, and now I get to the greatest winners of all time. If you remember, I started by saying that most chess exhibits show the world champions one by one, but not all of them have the same importance. You cannot compare, say, Smyslov and Tal to the importance of, say, Kasparov or Bobby Fischer, because they really control the world. So what I did is to choose those champions that really controlled the world. They really conquered the chess world. Now the choice is somewhat personal. You may argue why I didn't put Lasker in or why I put this in and so on. I feel very strongly that I made the good choice. So first I show Capablanca because I think he was really, over a significant period of time, he was cut above all others. And as I said, I'm very proud of this page, and I'm particularly proud because each and every item in this study was purchased separately. I didn't buy one lot with all these items. So we have, of course, the stamps showing Capablanca making the precise move. And these are archival items taken from Waterloo and Sons. And this is a strip of 6 with a handwritten standard for exam with a date which precedes the day of issue by 3 months or so. There's an error with the image shifted. There's a patterned copy of the 8-cent stamp and block of 4 from the imperf. There's only one sheet of 100 with the imperfs, and this is one of 4 blocks known. So again, we have the rarity factor here. We have the color trials. We have a specimen, punctual specimen with the word muestra, the as issued stamp, and the 2 plate varieties that we know with the Joseph and the Campion. The other world champion that absolutely has to be there is Bobby Fischer, because the way he beat his opponents in the early 70s was just unbelievable. So he gets a full page. And then there's a whole generation, virtually 25 years, in which the world of chess was controlled by Karpov and Kasparov. I think people slightly overlook the greatest of Karpov because Kasparov obviously decided to manage to defeat him. But I would say that probably until the mid-90s, Karpov was only second to Kasparov. So for 20 years, had it not been for Kasparov, he would probably have controlled the chess world for 20 years. That is really impressive. And of course, in our generation, the one entity that controls the chess world is obviously the computer. There's no question about that. So here I discussed that. Now I had to find the equivalents of military leaders who controlled the world. And there were some, again, you can argue why this and not that. Again, a personal favorite is Alexander the Great, because my teacher was very fond of the quote that Alexander wept because he ran out of worlds to conquer. So I really want to show how great Alexander was. And the way I do that, well, I place here a small map to show this is Macedonia, this is where Alexander came from, this is what he conquered. And he died in his 30s, so we really was all about business. And to show the size of his domain, where I decided to do that is to get cancellations from 2 cities that he founded and carry his name. And there are 6 or 7 cities like that. And I took the 2 that are geographically furthest from one another. So that's Alexandria in Egypt and Kandahar in Afghanistan. You should know that in the Muslim world, they don't say Alexander, they say Iskander. And from Iskander to Kandahar, it's a short distance. Change the name. So Kandahar is really after Alexander. To show Alexandria, let's minimize again. I have here a letter sent from Venetia to Alexandria from 1420. This is the oldest item in my collection. It's 600 years old. It's incredible to hold something like that in your hands. However, personally, I like the Kandahar letter better. The letter it's a postal stationery, and this is the front here, reduced in size. This is the reverse side. It was sent registered. You see here the registration mark. So because it's registered, an extra stamp had to be applied, and was sent to Armitzer. So there's the arrival cancellation, and we have a cancellation from Kandahar, November 4th. And we have the registration from Kandahar. Surprisingly enough, 2 different spellings. In the registration mark, Kandahar is spelled with a Q. And on the cancellation, it's with a C. Now, normally we'll spell Kandahar with a K. The post office in Kandahar was opened in 1879. The cancellation does not have the year, it only has the date of November 4th. But by 1881, they changed the spelling to K. So this cancellation could only be 1879 or 1880. There's no way for me to tell which year it is, but it is a very early cancellation from a relatively small post office. It's a very, very nice philatelic item. So this is Alexander. Sorry, I've reached the end of the frame. I'm moving to frame 8. And here I discussed briefly the Roman Empire and the Mongolian Empire, the largest land empire ever. And unfortunately, there are no good items to show that, but it's very important historically. And then we get to the British Empire. So here's a chance to redeem myself after what I've done to the English kings before, to show the magnitude of the British Empire. I first used the Malradi. Oh, okay, some disturbance, never mind. I showed the Malradi letter sheet because it really shows how Britain is in the center of the world and how the world is related to Great Britain. I use here there are two values for the Malradi. There's the 1 cent, 1 penny, the 2 penny. This is the 2 penny with a paper fold in the printing. It's very rare. I have the 1 pound Queen Victoria and 1 pound King George to set the time where the British Empire has really peaked. And I use this stamp from Canada, shows the British Empire colored in red. And when you look at the British Empire here, you can really see that this is an empire on which the sun never set. So this is why I use this letter with the constellation showing the sun, because it relates to the British Empire in that sense. I've mentioned before that it is not useful to put block of 4 of the same stamp, but here I have a justification, because there's an error in printing in this block of 4. Apparently what happened when this sheet was printed, the red color didn't come through very nicely. So the same sheet was entered again into the machine, and that resulted with few red dots being sprayed across. So that created sort of imaginary islands that do not really exist, thus sort of expanding the British Empire even more than it really was. And I have here a photocopy indicating where these imaginary islands were created. The next subchapters deals with team competitions as opposed to individual competitions that we've seen so far. And here I have the original artwork of one of the Yugoslavian stamps from 1950. And the flags really serve here to show how international it is. It's national themes that are being represented. So it's a very, really good to show team competitions. And of course, an original artwork for a 1950 stamp is far, far better than an original artwork for a stamp from the 80s. I've discussed this letter in Chester Preview, and this is what I mean when I said that the letters need to be of high quality, because it's not just a letter with a cancellation, but it's also registered. It went through airmail inside Poland, and there's a discussion of rate, so I can show philatelic knowledge this way. This is far more interesting than just having the cancellation on a stamp. That's it. And let's skip that. And now we get to the last chapter, which is the end of the exhibition. When I first exhibited and I only had 4 frames, one of the judges told me that I need an ending to my story. And I struggled for a while to find the ending. And then I came up with the idea, and I think it's the right idea, that so far we have discussed war, chess and war, and how similar they are. But the truth is that nowadays, they're not that similar. The similarity is mostly of historical origins and not so much nowadays. And the reason is because chess hasn't changed much in the last, say, 200 years, whereas war has changed dramatically during the time span. So the title of the last chapter, which ends my exhibit, is Chess and War Part Ways. And first I discuss the pieces. Chess pieces are the same as they were 200 years ago. It's not true for in war, because there are many pieces in war that weren't in existence 200 years ago, the tank being an obvious example. The chessboard is the same as it was. It's still 8x8 flat, and circular chessboard is just a figment of the imagination. It's not really happening. War has gone three-dimensional through the usage of Air Force and the uses of submarine. So it's really three-dimensional. The size of the chessboard hasn't changed. It's still 8x8, whereas the size of the war or the dimensions of war have changed dramatically. 200 years ago, the war was really confined to the battlefield. It didn't extend beyond that. Nowadays, we have missiles going hundreds of kilometers, so there's no really front and I don't know what's the word. You can't really say what the front line is anymore. And of course, chess is still has to do with chivalry. It's a friendly way to cross swords, whereas biological and mass destruction weapons such as the atom bombs have taken whatever chivalry was in the war, they've taken it out of it. There's absolutely nothing chivalry about that. And this stamp here from the Marshall Islands, I know the Marshall Islands is of very poor philatelic quality, but the image is so strong, I had to use it. In the meantime, other games have developed. We have tin soldiers that we can play with. And this German telegram from the 30s, showing a kid playing with tanks and with tin soldiers. So this is far more related to war. And of course, there's computer games, there's battle reenactment, and other means to play with war. You don't have to do it with chess. So the final item with which I conclude is that this meter from Cuba, which says, practice war, it is just like in life. And I say, no, right now, it's not so much so. It's really chess and war have parted ways. So that is the collection. And let's see if I conclude, and let's see if I can go back to, how do I stop share? Okay, and now I can see you again. And
Can you hear me?
yes.
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. I'm a neurologist living in Houston, Texas, originally from Iran. First of all, I cannot believe how wonderful this exhibition this is. Just if there was a prize more than gold, platinum, you should have received it. Absolutely breathtaking. However, a couple of things. Number one, certainly there's a similarity between chess and war, but I think I sent you an email saying this, but have you not noticed two essential things about chess and war? Number one is that what is bishop doing in a game of war? And the answer to that is that, in fact, it's not bishop, it's elephant. Elephant is fil, al-fil in Arabic, fil in Farsi, Persian.
Yes.
And then it was because of the similarity of this, it was developed in India. It was came to Persia. That's why a lot of the terms like checkmate, shahmat is Farsi, Persian. And then the Arabs brought it to Spain. And
Yes.
that is the reason for that. Number two discrepancy that I think you should mention in the comparing chess to war is the question of queen. Why should the king stay in his castle and send the queen out to fight? And the answer to that is that it's not the queen, it's vizier. Vizier, it's called in Farsi, it's called wazir, also in Arabic, which means the minister. Is the prime minister that goes to war.
Yeah. Yes.
The only other comment I want to make is that when you talked about the important empires and so on, you left out Cyrus the Great and the Great Persian Empire, which was no less important than Alexander the Great. Thank you.
Okay. Well, first, in case you didn't hear well enough, I should say that the question was, the exhibit is great and you should have won platinum. No, seriously.
Didn't you hear the rest?
Yes. I was joking. I heard everything.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You wanted to hear
Yes,
what
I
you
just
wanted
wanted
to hear.
repeat that. I
That's
just
right.
wanted to repeat that. Okay.
That's right. That's Alice in Wonderland.
To
He
refer
says,
to
I
your
use the word
comments-
to mean what I want it to mean.
To refer to your comments, I'm just too lazy now. Well, I shouldn't be lazy. Sorry. I'll go back to share my screen. So let's see how I do that. No. Oh boy. No, it doesn't work. How do I share? Oh, share screen with the.
There should be a new share button at the top,
Yeah.
maybe back at the bottom
This-
under share screen.
No. I'll be there in a second. I'll find how to do it. I hope. Oh boy. Okay, I'm sorry. It'll just take too long, so I won't do that. Sorry, everybody.
Just stop sharing.
Yeah, I'm trying to stop sharing. Is this? I don't know. Oh boy. I guess you can see how I struggle with all this. No. Oh, stop share. Here it is. Okay,
Yes.
sorry, everybody. To answer your questions, first, with regard to the bishop, I devote 2 pages in my exhibit to the bishop, and I distinctly say that it is an elephant. I show the elephant. I show the original artwork, which shows a chess piece design an elephant. I even show the stamp from Nicaragua where the tab says alfil. And I discussed that the elephant is the word elephant is actually is derived from alfil in Persian and Arabic. There's an explanation which I learned from John actually of why it became the bishop, with the elephant tusks being confused or reminding somebody of the hats, the pointy hats that the bishops used to
Yeah.
wear. So I do mention that. Also on the page, on the devoted to the Queen, I explained that the Queen really started as an advisor to the king, and we've corresponded that it's called wazir in the Persian or in Arabic. And I even used the booklet of the Faroe Islands to show that on the starting position, the queen is located next to the king because it is to serve as an advisor. The piece itself got named Queen much later, and I mentioned that because we believe, or that's what I've read, that it comes from a time around the 1500s or so, where the queens in Europe, there were a bunch of important queens like Elizabeth I, Catherine the Great, and so on. And the Western culture really decided that we should give some room for a queen on the chessboard. But originally, obviously, you're right, it is the wazir, it's the prime minister or advisor, something like that. Could you please remind me of the third point?
Cyrus the Great.
Yes, when again, you're right, absolutely about that. There's always a difficulty where you have to balance what your knowledge of history is with the philately. Okay, there's not enough philatelic material to show certain empires. And the Persian Empire, for example, is a victim of that because I couldn't find good items to show it. And I agree it's important. I distinctly remember that when I started dealing with that subchapter, I listed all sorts of empires that deserve a place, deserve mention. For example, I thought Karl the Great is worth mentioning. And it's just a matter of philatelic items.
Mm.
The same, in a sense, also applies to the great champions of chess. I wasn't sure if I should devote space, for example, for Lasker, who's technically at least, the longest reigning world champion. I could make a case for him, I couldn't make a case against him. But at the end of the day, there's very few items I can use to show Lasker. Whereas for Capablanca, I could find plenty of material, of good quality material. And I honestly think Capablanca deserves mentioning. Not that I took some unimportant player and I gave him a lot of space. So I accept your comment. Again, yes, you can.
Alekhine too. Yeah.
Yes, you can make a case for him too. It's very difficult to say who's the greatest. It's also personal, but also, how do I show Alekhine?
Absolutely.
How do I show him? It's not enough material to discuss him in at length. So yes, sometimes the historical facts are a victim of the existing philatelic items.
Can I raise it?
That's the only answer I can offer you. I take your point, you're right, but I just can't, I don't think I can do better at this point.
Can I raise a couple of points, please,
Yes,
Johan?
go ahead, Charles.
Thank you for an excellent presentation, absolutely wonderful. I had one query in particular on the US Civil War patriotic covers. You
Yes.
said there were 5 used ones known. that interested me because I own two, and I just
Yes.
wonder whether that's included with where does the number
Oh, there's
5
seven
come?
now.
Sure. It's very difficult.
It's difficult to know. But do you know where does the number 5 come from?
It's an estimation. I need to explain something. One of the problems an exhibitor has is to explain to the judges what is rare.
Mhm.
It's difficult to find because most judges, if not all, are not chess collectors. They do not
Right.
know it. So it is my duty, and it's also the way I can get points, is to explain to them what is rare and what is not. And one of the ways to do that is to put some statements of expressing rarity. Now, I don't know how many used patriotic covers are in existence. I don't know. I can only estimate. And I think the statement, typical statements for use for saying that sometimes okay, in the case of the inverted red rooks error, we know there's one sheet of 25, I think 40, one sheet of 40. We know that. With the patriotic covers, we do not know. But we all know, all people present here know it's very rare, very difficult to find. So what I do is either I write the number of items seen, and seen is by me.
Right.
After, being a serious collector for 35 years, the fact that I've seen very few is evidence of rarity, or known, that means that it was published by collectors in this field, and so on. When I estimated 5, the 5 I thought of were actually 4 that I know of. You have 2. I now have 1. And there's one I think I've seen years ago picture of. Oh, sorry. The 5th is the one that I think Manfred Rosler has, that is cut. It's not full.
Uh-huh. Oh, yes.
I'm very happy to say that out of the existing 5, I think mine is in the best of conditions. Not to be disrespectful for the 2 you have.
Yeah, I would agree. My copies are not as good. The other thing I wanted to ask was, you don't draw any analogy between FIDE, the World Chess Organization, and an equivalent in war. And I just wonder whether something like United Nations or something like that might be considered an equivalent in war.
Indeed. One of the things I haven't done yet, and I may do in the future, is put an ad of a page about FIDE, is the governing body of chess. Then put something about the Geneva Convention and the UN or the League of Nations as the controllers of war, so to speak. It's certainly something I'm considering doing. One of the reasons I haven't done it yet is that it requires a change of the plan.
Yes.
Because it doesn't fit currently in my plan. What probably I should be doing is take subchapter 2.5, where I discuss manufacturers, I discuss sponsors, and so on, and move that to where tournaments are discussed. Discuss there the governing body. It's not a triviality where to do, but certainly it's a good point and something that I'm considering doing. Yes.
Thank you very much.
First of all, the exhibition is just superb. But it's a real treat, utterly, to have you go through it, because we wind up getting a far better sense of the care and the effort in assembling it. I was struck by something, and just a thought that I had that I can't seem to shake. And there's another parallel, at least in my own mind. I've managed, and I take no delight in this, I've managed to get my correspondence rating up to 2540. And yet
Whoa.
I find myself utterly obsessed. Well, thank you, but I find myself utterly obsessed with what do I need to do to get it higher. And it seems to me that there's a distinct, that's the chess side, and the parallel here is the exhibition side, where you've achieved gold, my heaven, and yet there is a continuing drive. I mean, we're all just, yes, the same feeling,
It is.
and yet I sense the same drive on your part to continue to try to improve. And I'm not going to bore you all with the process that I go through, which involves going over hundreds of games every day. But I am curious about the process that you go through in thinking about your exhibit I mean, it's part of you. That's obvious. And how you go about the process of making it ever stronger, as opposed to just sitting on your laurels, which I know you don't do.
Oh, yeah, I don't do that because I would say, roughly speaking, I came to the conclusion that an exhibit that doesn't change loses anywhere between half a point to a point per year on average. So I've seen exhibits that haven't been changed, and I see them drop in points with time because other exhibitors just keep raising the bar. When I've seen exhibits like, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, items such as the letter I have of King Philip II or Charles II of England. 20 years ago, you wouldn't see items like that. They weren't so much in use. Today, you're almost expected to find items like that. I haven't really discussed it now, but I get points for development. Development, one of the things it means is that each item that I show should advance the story. So if for example, let's say I show, I don't know, the Olympiads. I needn't put 3 items that show Olympiads because they tell the same thing. So what I do is I put one item that shows the Olympic symbols of 5 interlocking squares, and one that shows the Hamilton-Russell Cup, and one that shows the constellation of a specific Olympics. So I need to develop something. If you go back 20 years ago, they wouldn't do that. They just put a bunch of items that show the same thing. So the bar is keeping being raised. Now, how do I improve? And my real ambition is to get those extra points and get to a score of 95 points, which gives me a large gold medal. So far, I'm getting 90, and the best is 92 points, and it's a gold medal. What I do is I look, where do I lose points? And the place I lose most points is on rarity, which in the past I've got 17 points out of 20. So I lose 3 points there. And I get 8 points for condition. So I lose 8 out of 10, I lose 2 points there. These are 5 points that I lose. If I compare the rarity of the items, I'll be able to get a point or 2 more in rarity. I'll get another point in condition, because condition and rarity are related. And I will get another point in philatelic knowledge, because if you get rare items, you have something to describe. You have ways of showing diversity of material and knowledge of that material. So this has been my main focus over the last few years. If I look back to 2017 when I first got gold, I haven't changed my plan at all since then. And even though I've been thinking about the point that Charles made that perhaps FIDA should be in there, and this would require me to change, so far I haven't done that. I'm focusing on material. And it's a little frustrating, I have to admit, that I keep improving that material and I get about the same score, eventual score. And the reason is because the bars keep getting higher and higher.
This was fundamentally my point. I keep playing over hundreds of games a day and my rating stays the same. So.
Yes. 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 So I don't know. I hope that I will make it to a little higher at least. I'm exhibiting in Budapest in March next year. I'll see what the judges will have to say because the last time I've exhibited was in 2018 in Thailand. So it's been 2.5 to 3 years in between, and I've changed a lot of items at time span. And hopefully I'll get a better notion of what I should do better.
For all present, the one of the pages, and I'll let you all guess, Yoram knows the answer, but one of the pages from this exhibit graces the cover of Chess Stamp Review 182, and we're proud to have it and hope to have many more.
You're almost perfect, and you don't want to be perfect because that's dead end. There's no room for improvement.
Okay. Something is going on in the computer. Okay, anyone else?
No, just thank you so much. Wonderful.
So thank you for attending.
Wonderful.
Yes, thank you.
And
Wonderful.
Thank you.
appreciate it. I will. I've recorded this session, so I'll get it on YouTube
Thank you.
and I'll send you the link.
Fabulous.
Okay, thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye
Great.
bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Thank you.